Hi, everyone. I'm Rob Hall. I'm the CFO of Oyster Consulting and the host of today's podcast. Are you trying to decide whether you should outsource your FinOp position? Today's podcast might be able to help you with that. Today, I'm here with Oyster's FinOp consultants, Jeff Harple and Clark Tucker, and we'll discuss why it's a good idea. Jeff and Clark both have extensive experience as outsourced FinOps, as well as having held CFO and FinOp positions in the securities industry prior to working for Oyster. Clark, why don't you give me a brief overview of what the FinOp role is and how Oyster can help?
Well, FinOp is one of the three required functions for a broker-dealer. You have to have a CEO, executive rep. You have to have a chief compliance officer. And you must have a financial and operations principal. And obviously the roles and the duties associated with them are segregated, but to focus on the FinOp role, it's the oversee, the supervision of all of the financial and operational aspects of the broker-dealer. I think we focus primarily on the financial and regulatory reporting aspects of that role. So in doing that, we work with local teams, with the staff, with accountants or bookkeepers at firms, and try to review everything that's taking place to make sure that it's compliant, and then take from that to prepare financial reports and regulatory reports, and then ensure that the firm is compliant and remains compliant in its filing and its contact and interaction with regulators. And so we can help fill that gap when that gap exists and the experience may not be resident already in a broker-dealer.
Well, what do you think? Well, Jeff, why don't I ask you this? What do you think makes a good CFO or FinOp?
Well, I think there's a couple ways to look at that. I mean, first is to be a good FinOp, in my mind, you need the background and experience working in a broker-dealer. It's a very specialized industry with very specialized rules, like the net capital rules, the other financial responsibility rules that Clark was talking about. And if you've never been exposed to them at all, they're going to seem like they're from out of left field, and you're really not going to know what's going on. So you really need to have had experience in the business, in the industry. You also need to be able to see the sort of the big picture of things. The financial responsibility rules require a lot of information about the firm in total. And if you really don't understand an entire firm or the entire business, it's very difficult to be sure, and we always have to be sure, that you really are in compliance, that you've asked every question you need to ask, that you've got all the documentation you need to get to really ensure you're compliant with all the rules. So I think those are very important. And with those go all the things you might typically think of as a good accountant or controller or CFO, as far as being very detail-oriented, very cognizant of deadlines, tasks that need to be completed, the order of those tasks, and all of those kind of things you might typically think of as and I'm an accountant, so I guess I can say this, as an accounting mentality or an accountant's mentality. So, I mean, I think all those are necessary to be a very good FinOp.
Your comment, Jeff, was good in that you can't turn an accountant into a FinOp unless they know the firm. You can't just hire an accountant and then expect them to take the Series 27 and be the FinOp unless they have the experience with the firm.
It's a hard and fast requirement from FINRA that someone doesn't just take the test and then get anointed the responsibility, because they can't possibly know it yet. There is, usually the 1 year rule or guideline where you have to have the credentials plus the appropriate experience. And that's where, periodically you see where someone thinks, oh, well, I passed the test. Now I'm as good as you are.
Yeah, and we've run into that in our experience. I know, Clark, you've worked on a number of engagements where they're trying to find somebody to fill a full-time, and you're filling in until they find that person.
Beyond that, even, Rob, beyond that is that once they find that person, while that person is gaining experience, we can tend to transition the roles. So, for some period of time, I would work with that person while I'm still the FinOp, but then at a point in time, 6 months or a year out, we transition that, and that person becomes the named FinOp. Yet, we're still there behind the scenes in a support role to help them with any odd questions that come up, so that, even once we've made that transition, we're still a support for them.
Yeah, I've had that experience too, where, in my case, the person who was going to take over was actually already identified.
Yep.
But they needed to pass the test, the exam, and they also needed to get the experience. So we act as the FinOp for that year, typically. After that year, we became support. They became the name FinOp, and we gave them support, answered questions, built on their experience, filled in the gaps. It works real well, actually, for the firm.
And I think that it's important that potential clients understand that that's actually a normal part of what we're doing. It's not, it's not as if we came in on a temporary basis and then there's some concern about ending the relationship, because this is a smooth off-ramp to the relationship. We can come in when they need immediate help and give them that help and work with their people and get everyone trained up and build the new norm of what needs to happen. And then at the time when it's appropriate to hand it off and reverse the roles, it's not like we're going to just walk away, and they don't have to feel like we have walked away. We just transition the role and continue to support them until that new person really is fully up and running. And that's a very normal part of what we do.
So that actually goes right into my next question. What are common mistakes that an inexperienced FinOp might be making? Jeff, do you want to handle that one?
To me, the most common mistake, and I don't know if I want to call it a mistake exactly, but it's really that lack of knowledge or experience. It's easy to read the rule book and think, okay, I got it, I'm going to go do this. And you might not realize there are certain nuances or interpretations that regulators have that you have to take into account. And I was younger once, so I can say this, I think. It's kind of easy to be young and cocky and overconfident, and you got to be careful. You got to be careful that, you don't be afraid to ask a question, be afraid to say, hey, I need a little help on this. I know all this, but there's this one thing. And a very common mistake is to not do that. You can end up in nice, deep water if you do that.
And I know that I've called and asked you questions a number of times. So
yeah, everybody pretty much I know or have worked with in the FinOp world, you have people who have done the role, and you call them and you ask questions. The field, in my estimation, and I think Oyster is a terrific example of, we help each other out. That 5-minute question can save you millions of dollars down the road. So, don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone. And if it turns into a bigger question, well, then we can help in other ways. But ask questions. I think that's advice to anybody starting out. You might call me, and I have a whole bunch of other people I can also call. So it's not just us. We're leveraging that out to get the best answers we can possibly get. If we don't know, we find it.
I agree with that. To build on what Jeff just said, I think, and Rob, also to circle back to your question about mistakes. And I think that if you've been in this business long enough, you realize that there are enough odd nuances to different things that makes you then understand you probably don't know all of the questions. And if you have someone with different experience or more experience, that's always a good thing, because that person may see the unknown to you and may know the question that should be asked and then ask it and get the answer to it, or know whom to pull in given a certain topic that, based on limited experience, might not register as a point of focus. But someone with experience and a team of people might be able to help in those peripheral ways that are not as obvious to a brand new person with a shiny license.
Another mistake, I mean, you learn something and you think you got it, but if you're not keeping up to date and current with anything that might change, what you learned 5 years ago might be wrong today. And if you're not, reading or attending conferences or talking to other people, it's really easy to get into the trap of, well, that's what I did before, and it was always right and acceptable, but it might not be today. So you've got to keep up. You've got to keep current. You've got to keep in touch with regulators, other industry leaders, and things like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So Clark, last year they came out with a new principal financial officer versus principal operations officer rule. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. I think that this is an example of the industry, I will say finally, to put some opinion to this, finally recognizing the realities of the situation in a lot of firms. In small firms, with limited purpose, one line of business or what have you, the roles could be easily combined, et cetera. But in larger firms with different avenues of business and different functions, I think it is probably safely stated that it's largely untrue that a single person actually had effective control over all of the many functions that were taking place. And so, in my experience at least, the person that was really over the financial operations of the firm had much less to do with the day-to-day operations of different departments. And this division of titles allowed for responsibility to be assigned at a more local level with, yes, granted, still one single senior point of focus, but still, this allowed for different people to be responsible for their areas of expertise and their areas of responsibility at a more local level. I think this was a long overdue correction that instead of having everything go to a single person, it allowed for a more accurate reflection of the business and how it's being run. I celebrate it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, for many years, especially if you were in a large, say, clearing firm, you had to be very careful how you defined your roles and responsibilities and your job descriptions and things like that, because if you were the principal financial officer or the principal operations officer, you both had Series 27 licenses, and it was very easy, sort of, for a regulator to cross the lines. And this, I think, clarifies that greatly. So now you have a principal financial and a principal operations officer, and they have their own set of expectations. I think it's great. So I agree with Clark.
Now, for small firms, though, it's possible with the same person to fill both roles, correct?
It is, and it's not a conflict either, because with a small firm, you typically have obviously much lower activity, but you also have different kinds of activity. You tend to focus the activity. It might be a private placement firm or a M&A advisory firm, but they're very narrowly focused lines of business. Where I think it has become and did become an enormous problem was when you had larger firms or retail-oriented firms or clearing firms where you had a cashiering function that would be in the operational side, but critically important, as opposed to financial accounting on the other side. But typically the person that's responsible for the financial accounting and the real books and the reporting doesn't have as much to do with the day-to-day, functioning of, say, a cashiering unit. And that's an example of where this allows each group to really be held to its level of responsibility and experience. And we're not so blurring the lines by grouping all of this under one thing. That's a good example there. But yes, in a small firm, the activity is very different. The volume is very different. And generally speaking, I think that the specific day-to-day functions that are being processed are much more narrowly focused and much more easily supervised.
Okay. Jeff, anything to add there?
Not really. I think that's exactly right.
Okay. Well, what are the regulators? What are you seeing the regulators looking for when they come in and do an audit of the financial responsibilities at Capital?
Well, let me answer the first part of that by going back to a previous question about mistakes. This is sort of can be a common mistake, and it also is a very easy area for regulators to pick up or pick out and pick on. And that's just the whole notion of documentation. It's the old adage, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. So we're all used to that, be it compliance, auditing, or whatever. But it's very true for any of the FinOp functions too. If you're going to comply with net capital rules, you've got to be able to document that you've done the proper procedures and that things you're calling allowable are and things you're calling allowable aren't, and you've got to be able to prove it. And a lot of times you might have done it right, but you can't document it, particularly smaller firms who might not be used to that level of documentation. So, a common mistake, and also something regulators pick on, is just have you documented everything that you say you're going to do? Is it there in the work papers? So one, that's a common mistake, and two, examiners will look for it.
Make sure you initial the things that you have reviewed.
Date and initial.
And as custodian, as the FinOp, you're the custodian of the firm's books and records, and that's clearly enumerated in the rules. And so you are, as Jeff said, you are responsible for ensuring that the firm is maintaining the right books and records in the correct manner for the appropriate amount of time, and that they're easily accessible when they need to be. And that is certainly a responsibility of the FinOp.
Any other questions or comments that either of you guys think are pertinent?
No, not that's coming to mind.
I will say no.
Okay then. Thanks to you both for sharing your experiences. Also, thanks to everybody for listening. If you have any questions about what we've discussed or other FinOp questions, or if you have any topics that you'd like us to discuss in the future, feel free to call us at 804-965-5400 or visit our website at www.oysterllc.com.